So proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting
You know what? I say it all the time. Old age is not for wimps. But would you believe you're going to come to a men's club and be able to get hearing aids, crutches, wheelchairs? But anyway, today we have David Huffaker from the Port Authority. And believe me, if you watch the news, you'll know this guy's got a lot on his mind. And I asked him before the meeting if he minded any questions about the COVID vaccine issue, and he said he's going to cover that. So he's going to talk about that and bridges and a couple of other things. But David is the Chief Development Officer of the Port Authority, so this whole thing is on his shoulders. So with that, please welcome David Huffaker.
I think I'm good. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah. If I start to wander around and gesticulate a little bit, the microphone may leave my mouth, so just raise your hand, let me know you can't hear me. So thank you, Jerry, and to the Sewickley Men's Club. I really appreciate the opportunity. As you've heard, my name is David Huffaker. My title is Chief Development Officer, but trust me, I'm not going to come to you for fundraising. I'm not going to ask you for any money. The title Chief Development Officer means that I'm in charge of our engineering and technical services team, though I'm not an engineer by trade. Also our planning function, I'm not a planner by trade, and also our customer experience in terms of park and ride lots, transit shelters, our access paratransit program. So kind of everything about Port Authority service that is not buses and trains and operators and maintenance. However, I'll cover some of those things as well. I really am excited to be here. We've been trying to schedule this for a number of months, and Jerry and I have been back and forth. One time we got canceled because of COVID variant outbreak. Another time we got canceled because of snow. So if you'd have told me this morning that there was an outbreak of locusts, I would have believed it. And so I'm very glad to be here. And so today, and I apologize, I do have a presentation, and Jerry had warned me to bring the cords to connect to the projector here, and I didn't do that. So I apologize, because I've got a lot of really great pictures that you won't be able to see, but I'll try to describe them to you. But this will be a great opportunity for me to give you an overall update on the Port Authority. We obviously have been in the news a lot lately and over the past few years. So I'll cover some things around COVID, what's happening with the pandemic and our response to that, and most recently with our vaccine requirement for all staff. I'll also talk about our long-range planning effort. We did have a long-range plan adopted by our board last September. And then another item that came in the news recently has been bridges. So I will cover bridges, both primarily the Port Authority bridges, but I'll talk a little bit about the Fern Hollow collapse and what that means for the Port Authority. So just a brief background about myself. I started at the Port Authority about 3.5 years ago, moved here from Seattle. I'm a native Californian, and I've been chasing bad weather ever since. So went to school in the Bay Area and then moved up to Seattle. It got a lot of rain and mist and that kind of thing. But coming to Pittsburgh has given me a whole new dimension on bad weather. And I have to say I'm very happy. I love the cold weather, and so this winter has been fantastic for me. I've been very happy with that. I've got 4 kids, and that was part of the driver for coming east. 3 had already left the house and were trying to get away from us and had moved east to the Mississippi, so we tracked them down. I was trying to make clear to them that they can run, but they can't hide, and so we tracked them down. I've got a daughter in Boston. I've got a couple kids in Chicago now, and then a son who's a senior at Penn State. So it's been fantastic being here. The people of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County have been so friendly, and I just can't thank you all enough for the warm welcome I've had here. So today, as I said, I'm going to cover what's happening with COVID, both in terms of our ridership and our response to that, as well as some of the precautions and things we have in place to try to encourage people to come back to public transit. We'll talk about our long-range plan and then bridges. I actually came here on the Route 14 bus from downtown today, and really for me that was kind of a microcosm of the Port Authority experience. You have the good. I got off the T at Allegheny Station, and lo and behold, the 14 bus was right there ready to go and picked me up, and I got going right away. So I actually got here half an hour earlier than I thought I would, which was great. But on the way, well, and I guess other goods, on the drive, I get to see people who are getting on and getting off, and for many of them, it's clearly the only opportunity they have to move around Allegheny County. They don't own a car. Overheard one person who said that she had been at the doctor, found out she was pregnant. She was going home to her partner to let him know. And so you have all of life happening when you're on the bus. You had people going to school. You had people going to doctor's appointments. You had people getting on in Sewickley and getting off at other stops in Sewickley. Really just kind of showed you the value of public transit. And so it's a great reminder for me of why it's important that we get better at what we do every day. And talking to people like you with, and I encourage questions, and we'll wait for the end. If I haven't answered a question or something that you're dying to know, please let me know. If I can't give you an answer, I'll make sure to get an answer later. But I'm really happy for this opportunity. So just about 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, everything was humming for the Port Authority. We were seeing increasing ridership. Our new CEO, Catherine Kellerman, who had started about 6 months prior to me, had created a lot of momentum for change and improved focus on the customer experience at the Port Authority. We were in the midst of doing public outreach sessions where we were kind of doing an open house, but out in the community. We were actually getting ready to go to the Pittsburgh Technology Center out in Robinson to provide an update for some of the Western communities, and that was right when everything shut down. And the response of the community, as you all know, everything shut down. We had basically a 90% decline in ridership from 1 week to the next. So it was scary, and we've all lived through it, so I don't need to rehash all of the history. But what we did notice, we started to see some trends fairly quickly. The commuter routes, the bus routes that have limited stops, the T, which runs from the South Hills into downtown, saw the biggest decline. People were not going into the office. Those routes saw a 90% decline immediately and have stayed 90 to, at best, 70% decline in ridership since. However, after the first couple weeks of lockdown, we saw our local routes, the routes that maybe don't even serve downtown Pittsburgh, but connect communities, connect to hospitals, connect to essential work. Those routes actually recovered quite quickly and have exceeded 50% of their normal ridership and continue to improve in that realm. So we certainly can see the value of providing those essential services. We actually responded during the pandemic to reduce some of our commuter service and add some frequencies to some of those routes that handle underserved communities. So we also had capacity limits on the vehicles. So we would have a 40-foot bus, like what goes through Sewickley. The most you could have on the bus was 15 people. If you're on a bus route that runs maybe every hour and your bus happens to be full and the driver goes past you, you've got to wait another hour to get on the bus to hopefully get to your job. Hope you don't get fired that day. And so particularly for those communities, we did try to increase the frequencies there, recognizing that if we're not going to carry as many people per route, per trip, we need to add more trips. So we did do that, and so that was quite successful, and one reason why we were able to see a recovery in ridership on those routes. Today, we are still seeing increases. I have my chart here. It's actually, I'm glad I'm not showing this because it's a little bit hard to see, but our January ridership was about 40% higher than January of the year before. So things are recovering, but 40% on a small number is not a big recovery. So we're still working on trying to get riders to come back. So how are we doing that, or what are we doing to get ridership to come back? We've done a lot of focus groups where we talk to customers, both people who are riding the service and then people who are not riding the service, so that we can understand, what would make them feel better, what would make them feel comfortable to be able to get on. Obviously, our ridership will improve the most when downtown workers return to the office at least 3 days a week. And some of the big employers in downtown Pittsburgh, such as BNY Mellon, PNC Bank, are starting to have people come back to the office. However, many of them have made it very clear that they're never going to go back to 5 days in the office and working 9 to 5. There's going to be a much more flexible workforce in the future. And so that's something that we'll just be continuing to evaluate as people start to come back. I was talking to a few people here, and the past several weeks, March essentially, has felt, I wouldn't call it normal in downtown Pittsburgh, but certainly there's a lot more activity. This weekend, the NCAA basketball tournament is in Pittsburgh, so it's exciting. There's a lot of buses carrying teams and fans around the community, and so there's a much higher level of vibrancy than had been there over the past couple of years. So I'm optimistic that people are going to come back. One of the things that we would look at is pre-pandemic, we had some routes that would carry 120 people at a time. So 120 people on a bus is kind of what you picture when you see pictures of Tokyo or India. People, you almost have to push people onto the bus to fit them on. I wouldn't call that a success. That was not success in terms of, boy, it's great to have everyone squished up next to each other. That's not something people are going to accept today. So the fact that ridership maybe doesn't get to 100% of where it was pre-pandemic is still not a failure. I think we will be able to see a steady return of riders, and if we get to 80 or 90% of that normal, I think that'll be great. If we only have 100 people on a bus, that'll still be great, and that bus will feel very full. And I would guess, given our new sensitivities, many people will feel a little bit uncomfortable to have someone standing over them and breathing. So I think we need to be cognizant of a new reality, which is people have different expectations than what they did in the past. Whether that's what your work experience will be or what your transit experience will be. We've been targeting the end of each variant, as this hopefully is the time that we get to normalcy. I think I'm personally optimistic, but I'm going to knock on wood, that having gotten through the Omicron variant, I feel hopeful that we're through the worst of it. Certainly the vaccine numbers are helpful, and so we're starting to see some improvement there. But we're doing a lot of things to make people feel safe on our service. We have what's called a Good to Go campaign, where we have actually added some air filtration systems on our buses and trains that purify the air and constantly recirculate the air, similar to what airlines have on the airplanes. And I think we've been able to demonstrate that the level of pure air on our service is certainly better than it was pre-pandemic, but it's better than just walking around downtown Pittsburgh. We also have a number of promotional campaigns to encourage people to come back. We've just changed our fare structure also. In the past, we would have, say, a monthly fare or a monthly pass. But if today, for example, if I bought my pass today, it would expire at the end of March. And so why would you buy a monthly pass if you're only going to get 2 weeks of use out of it? What we've been able to do is put this pass in place that now is good for 31 days after I buy it and activate it. So at least now, if I get paid on March 18th, I can buy my pass that day and know that I'm going to get a full month out of it. And so it's hopefully a little bit more flexible to deal with people who don't have necessarily the means to buy their pass whenever they feel like it. All along throughout the pandemic, we have required masks on our buses and trains. That actually is a TSA mandate, much like if any of you have been flying on airplanes. That requirement is in place for our service. That mask mandate was going to expire on March 18th, but it's now extended for another month. So we will at least continue to require masks at that point. And through our surveys, we have certainly heard that masks are an important thing for someone to feel comfortable on the bus. You know, you don't know what the person next to you or the person standing up on the aisle, what they've been doing, and so having them wear a mask has made everyone feel more comfortable. So that gets to vaccines. We have had a vaccine incentive for staff for the past year, as long as the vaccines have been available. So any staff, except for the senior team, but any staff who had been fully vaccinated would have gotten a monetary benefit, a couple $100, but it certainly outweighed the cost to our healthcare system if people were going into the hospital with COVID symptoms. And so it was something that we've been trying to encourage, the adoption of vaccines throughout our staff. And we got up to about 70% or so. But the very sad part, we've had 7 employees pass away from COVID, which out of our 2,600 is not a huge number, but some of those people have passed away since vaccines have been available, and that feels tragic. And so we put in place, after several months of planning, put in place a mandated vaccine requirement. So anyone who wanted to continue working at Port Authority needs to be vaccinated as of March 15th. So that date has just passed. And we gave plenty of warning. The incentives are still in place, so if someone does get their vaccination, they would still get their monetary benefit. And we also added some additional sick pay, so if someone did have a reaction to their vaccine, I know I felt bad after my second shot, we would allow an extra 2 days of sick pay as well. So anyone who was not vaccinated as of March 15th is subject to discipline. up to and including termination, and that's for all staff, whether they're represented staff or non-represented staff, whether you're a desk worker or someone who's turning a wrench, driving a bus. And so while we're up to now 80%, and in fact, I think we're actually closer to 85%, that still leaves a large number of employees who are unvaccinated. And so this week, we have started to notify those employees that they are on leave until we can have the hearings to determine their vaccine status. We've been encouraged over the past several weeks, where we had been at about 500 employees had been unvaccinated. We're now down to 200. So there's been an adoption, but there are still a number of employees who are unvaccinated, and a number of other employees, whether they might already be vaccinated, feel like we did the staff a disservice. And so they have been disappointed in the Port Authority leadership. There's actually a protest happening downtown today. I don't know who the people are protesting, but it sounds like there's a crowd of about 40 or 50 people who are upset with the vaccine mandate, and so there will probably be some news in the TV media today about that. Fortunately, I'm here, so I don't know all the details of it, but we'll see how that goes. I think this is the right thing for us to do. We are going to get back to a point of stability where we can operate the service that we need to operate. We have had a number of trips that have been that we haven't been able to operate, and so that's been very frustrating for us. But we feel good that we're doing the right thing by our staff and by our customers who are expecting that their operator is not going to be sick and is not going to get them sick. And so we think it's an important point both to protect our staff and also to protect our customers. But I'm happy to answer questions about that at the end as well. So briefly, I did have a lot of slides about Next Transit, which is our long-range plan. I'm very excited about that. Probably that could almost be a whole separate presentation talking about some of the future plans that we do have for the Port Authority. But just briefly, so this was a 25-year plan for the Port Authority. So our target year was 2045. And it was something that the Port Authority has never really had a long-range plan of its own. We've piggybacked with the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. We've done some work with the city of Pittsburgh, but never have had a long-range plan just for ourselves. And so this gives us a chance to kind of think about what do we want, what does the public want, what are some of the exciting projects that we could be working on in the future. So we reached out, had a number of public meetings, and I'm going to do air quotes, public meetings, because some of them were on Zoom. We also did do some sessions where we had a tent out in the community, and so customers and stakeholders who were interested could give us feedback that way. We sent out a bunch of mailers. We actually went out to senior citizens communities, to schools, and solicited input from those groups as well. And so we've been working with them to hear what the public wants, and also adding in a bunch of data in terms of where people live today, where they work today, and then using some of the growth that's projected in the future. So understanding, okay, if Washington County is starting to see growth, or if there's more jobs being created in the Strip District or Hazelwood Green, or some non-traditional sites that that are not in the Golden Triangle, then that's important for us to know. All of our service, well, not all, but 85% of our service begins or ends in the Golden Triangle, and that's not necessarily reflective of where people live and work today. So we're looking at ways that we can provide some better connections from one center to another without forcing someone to go from Lawrenceville to downtown and then back out to Oakland just because they're trying to get from Lawrenceville to their high-tech job to their night school or something in Oakland. So hopefully identifying some of those corridors so that we can provide some of those connections. So we identified a series of studies that will be done so that we can further evaluate some of the opportunities that are available to us. And so the kind of the top few categories or corridors of service was one similar to what I just hinted at, which is connecting Lawrenceville and the Strip District to the Hill District, Oakland, and down to Hazelwood, and then potentially a connection out into Carrick on the other side of the Mon River. That, for those who are trying to figure out on the geography how that would work, it's very tricky because you have the river plain at Lawrenceville and the Strip, then you go up to a hill for the Hill in Oakland, and then back down on the other side of the bluff down to Hazelwood, and then you're crossing a river going up a bluff over to Carrick. So very challenging. In the past, Pittsburgh has solved those connections with incline railways, but it could be something like a gondola or some other kind of out-of-the-box solution. That's something that we're going to be studying and trying to determine what is the appropriate way to connect those communities. We also will be looking at extending the East Busway and connecting out to McKeesport, Monroeville, and Points East. We also are looking at an airport corridor where we can provide a better connection from Oakland and downtown out to the airport. I can't say it's going to be a train on day one, but we certainly could provide some improved bus rapid transit, and then ultimately, maybe in 25 years, there could be a train out to the airport, which I think would be very exciting for everyone. There are a number of other corridors that we'll be looking at, and so I will provide a link for anyone who's interested in getting more information about the long-range plan to give you a chance to kind of see what's coming there. We also will be looking at here, I gotta get forward here, some other programs. Not necessarily expansion programs, but things like improving our bus stops and our bus shelters. As I said, when you ride the 14 along the Ohio Valley, you see some bus stops that are literally just a stick in the ground next to a guardrail on the roadway, and that's not a safe place for someone to wait for a bus. Certainly doesn't make you feel like, boy, Port Authority really thinks I'm great. So we're trying to upgrade that experience for people and make it safe, and work with the local jurisdictions to improve some of the sidewalk connections and maybe crosswalks to make the walking experience safe for everyone, not just transit users, but anyone in the community. We are looking at improving our ADA accessibility. We have a number of stations that were built before the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it is literally impossible for someone in a wheelchair to access the public transit system in some locations, and so we need to change that. And so we're doing a complete evaluation of all of our stations to identify those that need to have some upgrades so that we can make the service accessible to all. We'll be also looking at implementing battery electric buses or zero emission buses in the future. Our goal is that by 2045, we are zero emission for all of our service. That's, again, going to require a lot of investment in infrastructure and charging facilities to make that a reality. We have 730 buses, so right now we have a total of 8 electric buses. Our experience has been very good. We have plans to add another 15, but even at that point, we're at 23, which is, I think, about 3% of our service. So we've got a long way to go, but the nice thing is that's a goal of many agencies across the country, so we can piggyback off of the experience of some of these other agencies and hopefully learn from them and also see the market adapt and make that technology cheaper for us and for all systems. So there are a lot of, and I'm just touching on a few of the highlights, but our goal with the next transit plan, if we did everything that's in our plan, we would be today, where about 2.5 to 300,000 people have access to our, what I would call our rapid transit system, and that would be walking distance to a bus route that's high frequency or to the T. With this expanded system, we could reach 730,000 people, which would be really exciting. So we're going to look at what are of the ideas out there, what are some of the most attractive things that we can invest in and that would have immediate bang for the buck, if you will. Okay, so I'm going to now talk about bridges. And so on, let's see, January 28th, which was a Friday, I was walking into work. It was a snowy day. I was very happy. And that was right as I got in is when I heard that the Fern Hollow Bridge had collapsed. And unfortunately, there was one of our buses on the bridge. And so the pictures were quite alarming. You see a very large bridge. It's a 750-foot span. You probably have all seen the pictures of the bus that rode the bridge on the way down, and there were a number of cars as well. I think a total of about 12 vehicles. Fortunately, no one was seriously hurt. Certainly, we were very fortunate that it was relatively early on a Friday morning when there weren't very many people on the bridge. If it had happened on an afternoon commute during the middle of the week and let's say pre-pandemic, there could have been hundreds of people on that bridge, and I am pretty assured that it would not have ended so tamely, if a complete bridge collapse could be considered tame. But we were all very fortunate and happy that there were not serious injuries. That bridge in Squirrel Hill and connecting to Regent Square and Points East is a pretty major point for us. We have a number of bus routes that use that bridge, and so to have that out of service for a long time is going to certainly be an inconvenience for our riders. But we'll reroute our service and we'll use the East Busway a little bit more, and I think we should be able to adapt. I was going to say fortunately. Just as a matter of fact, that bridge is owned by the city of Pittsburgh, so it's not in our purview to maintain or manage, and I can't speak to the investigation as to the cause of the collapse, but we continue to cooperate with the National Transportation Safety Board and work with the city of Pittsburgh, not just for that bridge, but we're also working with the city on a number of other bridges. So there has been a very high attention on our bridges and all bridges. The Port Authority itself owns and maintains 79 bridges, and some of them are more than 100 years old and have been around from a very long time ago. Some of them we don't even operate service on, but they were part of the old Pittsburgh Railways, and so when the Port Authority was formed, we inherited that bridge. And the one thing I know you can't do is hand a bridge over to someone else and say, here, you take it. It's sort of one of those things that once you own it, you're going to own it forever. And so we have, over the past number of years, worked to improve the condition of our bridges. And those 79 bridges have an average condition score of 6.1, and a 6 on the National Bridge Inspection Scale is satisfactory. So overall, we feel pretty good about those bridges. However, we do have a number of bridges that are in the poor status. And so we have stepped up both our review of those bridges, as well as made sure that in our capital program, those bridges are identified and will be addressed within the next year. And all of those bridges will be addressed. So I feel good about that. Now, 1 week after the Fern Hollow collapse, there was yet another storm. This was actually the Friday that I was going to come out and speak to the men's club. And so the day before we had canceled because of the threat of a storm. And I can remember that Friday morning, this was February 4th, I believe. I was walking into work and it was cold. It was quite cold, but there had been very little snow. and I had just texted my wife to say, boy, this storm was sure overblown. There's nothing happening with this. And I would guess probably within the next 15 minutes, we got word that some maintenance staff who were checking some snow clearing on the South Busway identified a gap in a bridge that we own called the Sawmill Run Bridge, otherwise known as the Palm Garden Bridge. And that's a major connection point for our Red Line and our South Busway into downtown Pittsburgh. We were lucky that the staff were alert and noticed this gap, and so we sent out our engineering team to evaluate the bridge and determined that it needed to be shut down for precautionary reasons, and sure enough identified that there had been, and I'm not a bridge engineer, I'm learning more than I probably wanted to learn, but essentially in the expansion joint, there was an infiltration of water, and then there was a flash freeze event that when water freezes, it expands, and unbeknownst to us and everyone else in the area, there was actually an abutment in the hillside right near the bridge, probably related to an old version of the bridge from the 70s, and that abutment essentially created a backstop, so the only way that the bridge could move was into the rest of the bridge, which created that large gap. And so that was essentially the root cause of why we were concerned about the bridge. And so we have shut that bridge down, and think over about a 3-month period we'll be able to make our repairs. It's actually quite extraordinary. Where we're actually jacking the bridge up so that we can replace some of the bearings that support the bridge structure. And once those supports are put back in place, we'll lower the bridge back down, replace the rail that's on the bridge, and it should be good to go. Now, the humbling part about that, and maybe the art behind the science, that bridge had been inspected many, many times, and it also had a satisfactory score. It was not on our list of poor bridges that were on our watch list. So it's a cautionary tale that you can do all the things you need to be doing as far as inspections and maintenance and repairs, and you have your capital programming, and then there can be a flash freeze event like we had that morning, and all bets are off. And so it's very humbling, and reiterated the fact that not just for Port Authority, but all of Allegheny County, which has more bridges than just about anywhere else in the nation, we've got a lot of work to do to maintain our bridges in a state of good repair. Since that time, we've spoken to many communities who are interested in the bridges in their neighborhoods to ensure that their bridges are being taken care of. So the Emsworth Bridge, the Ben Avon community has reached out to us, and we have 3 bridges in that area that are of interest, and we were able to provide the most recent inspection reports and our verification that those bridges are in good shape. But throughout our system, again, we have 79 bridges. We are continuing to monitor our capital program and ensure that we are putting in place all of what we need to keep them in a state of good repair, so we don't have to make any other emergency closures in the future, hopefully. So I've gone on a little bit longer than I wanted to. I, at this point, would be happy to open up for questions in any area, and happy to address those. Thank you.
We'll let our treasurer have the first question.
Yeah, and it's going to be about money.
Okay.
What is your target for how much of your budget is going to be covered by your ridership in the near future, and where do your subsidies come from?
That's a great question. So our fare box recovery, which is a transit measurement of how much the money at the fare box captures, covers the costs of the system, our fare box recovery is at about 25%. So for every dollar of expense, about 25% is covered by customers. Now, we have a couple programs in place where we've actually renegotiated our UPass agreement with the University of Pittsburgh and other institutions are signing on. Carnegie Mellon, Point Park, we're in negotiations with Carlo, perhaps Robert Morris, maybe Duquesne. Those renegotiations should increase the amount of fares that are covering cost. The other subsidies come from either, we have some federal support for our vehicle overhaul campaigns, so major overhauls that make up a fairly large piece of our budget get covered through those programs, but the bulk of it comes from our state support from PennDOT, and that had previously been provided through the Act 89 funding that's actually provided for turnpike funding to go towards public transit in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That act expires June of 2022, and so the Commonwealth is now looking at alternative ways of funding, and that probably is going to come from the general fund. The Act 89, essentially, when it sunsetted, it restored that funding to come from the general fund. Yes?
My question deals with your comments about the bus stops that were in need of repair.
Yes.
And specifically the ones that did not meet ADA requirements.
Yes.
Do you have any approximate numbers on how many of those there are?
Boy, that's a great question. So we have a total of about 7,000 bus stops in our system. And out of that, the number of bus stops with actual shelters is in the hundreds, low hundreds. So it's not very many. And there's a couple of factors for that. In the city of Pittsburgh, the shelters are actually owned by the city. And one of my pet peeves is that contract that the city has is more of an advertising contract and a billboard than it is a customer service. And so one of my goals would be for Port Authority to have a little bit more ownership of the bus shelters in the city of Pittsburgh itself. Now, outlying other communities, the Port Authority has a little bit more capacity to install our own bus shelters. However, we do need to work with the local jurisdictions for sidewalk improvements and putting in concrete pads so that there's a landing spot for that shelter to be placed. And we are working on some programs where we can partner with local jurisdictions to provide some of that capacity. Perhaps the Port Authority would contribute some to the sidewalk improvements to provide some of that connection. Yes?
If I'm reading you right, that's only about a 10% penetration.
Yes. Yes, it's quite low.
And the ADA has been in place how long?
The ADA has been in place for 20, 30 years.
So in 20 to 30 years, you only have a 10%.
Yes.
Jeez.
Now, well, so I will say there are some locations that are ADA accessible that are not, that do not have a bus shelter. And in fact, the bus system itself, the kneeling buses can lower and they have ramps. So I don't want to equate the number of shelters to ADA accessible. The ADA accessible is actually quite a bit higher. Where I was describing our need for ADA improvements is primarily on the T. We have a number of stations that are not accessible for someone in a wheelchair. Now, you could get on a bus in the Ohio Valley or in many locations throughout the county. You could get on a bus in a wheelchair. The bus would pull up, it would lower, and provide a ramp. So don't let me misstate that we only have a few hundred that are ADA accessible. We are ADA accessible for the bulk of the stops, but in terms of providing a shelter and some of the improved amenities, that would be in addition. Yes?
Yes, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
They may or may not be in your expertise, but the first one you mentioned about electric buses. does anybody consider, these buses are zero emission, but the electricity has to be produced somewhere, which is going to produce emissions?
Yes, that is a great point, and it is a piece that we've talked about. And also that some of the electricity, so we talk about, we're going to be 100% electric. As you described, that electricity could be generated by a coal plant or a nuclear plant or natural gas. So one, we're not walking away from locally produced sources of electricity, but that is actually a very hot topic in the industry, is not just what you're using to fuel your buses, but where does that fuel come from? And are there ways to either do carbon offsets or other ways to offset some of that footprint? So that's something that we're actually trying to learn a little bit more before we just go whole hog into buying a bunch of electric buses, because we want to make sure that we're being good stewards and getting the source of fuel incorporated into our plan.
Next question, I don't know if this is under your jurisdiction, but Route 79 going into the city, does your HOV lanes come under the Port Authority?
No, that is a PennDOT facility there, and I believe, and this predates me and my time at Port Authority, so I'm not authoritative on this. I think when the HOV lanes were originally constructed, they were intended to perhaps provide a capacity for a future transit operating in that corridor, and so that would be something we might consider and would talk to PennDOT about trying to more effectively use that facility, because what I've seen, and particularly with the pandemic, is typically those lanes have been closed.
Yes, and is there any consideration of maybe putting a T to past the North Hills going out to the Cranberry area, because this area is really grown?
Yes, so that would be one of those corridors that certainly there's growth that is exceeding the reach of our system today. The furthest north our system goes is essentially McCandless, or out just short of Wexford, and so that would be one where there might be some regional opportunities where we could coordinate with Newcastle and Butler Transit to provide maybe I haven't spoken to those agencies yet, but look for ways to provide improved connections in Cranberry, so that perhaps rather than having their buses go all the way into downtown Pittsburgh, perhaps they could serve a park and ride facility or some sort of transfer point in Cranberry that would also be a way to collect people in Cranberry and get them into Pittsburgh. But yes, Cranberry is definitely on our list, and using 279 and 79 to get people to and from Pittsburgh is very attractive. Yes.
Yes. Before the pandemic, I used to be able to ride the bus for free with my Medicare card. Now I understand you have to have some sort of special pass. So your Medicare card is no longer valid?
And this gets a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I believe you just need to go to a customer service center where you can take your Medicare card and they will give you a senior pass, and then you would have the same benefits that you had before with the Medicare. But there is a need, and I believe, again, I don't want to overcommit anyone, but I believe they were also setting that up in local, either state representative offices or state senate offices, where people could go in their community to switch out their card to get a senior pass.
Okay. The other thing is that probably 7-8 years ago, they built a brand new bus shelter outside of McCormick School on Beaver Grade Road. We've never had a bus that goes down Beaver Grade Road.
Interesting.
And they keep changing Lamar maintains the signage on the shelter and everything.
Yep.
Why was that done?
That's a very good question. I can't tell you the specifics for that particular decision. There are some places in the county where there are bus shelters. I can think of another one that I can see when I'm riding the bus out to the airport. and in Robinson, there's a bus shelter that does not have any service. So some of those shelters that were used back before the major service cuts of the 2000s, there were some cuts in 2007 and 2009. Some of that service was reduced, and the shelters...
Never any service.
Never service? Okay, so I need to do some research to find out a little bit more about that. I'll find out. Yes?
Okay. When are we going to get bus service back in the North Hills on 19? We have to go all the way to McKnight Road.
Yep.
And we have to cross McKnight Road coming back out of town.
Yeah.
Where we used to be able to just get a stop like at the Chop and Save where we have a parking lot and a traffic light.
Yes. So I can't say when, but I know that that is something that we're looking at. We just, well, pre-pandemic, we have just provided a connection to CCAC North, but that's not quite meeting what you're looking for. I can tell you that McKnight Road is a very difficult road. It's an unsafe, and again, it's a prime example of where there are bus shelters next to guardrails, and so we're working very intensely with PennDOT to try to improve that corridor, but to get something closer in the North Hills to what you're describing is going to require some expansion.
And one other thing, there used to be a park and ride lot in Warrendale where the Port Authority went out to, and they discontinued that one.
Yes.
And I know for a fact our park and ride lot in Ross, it's always full. And I'm positive they give people out there the same opportunity. They do it too.
Yes, I actually agree. And the model of service that I came from in Seattle definitely incorporated park and rides in communities like you're describing. And so while I don't necessarily want to see Port Authority funds building parking, certainly tying into developments or to empty lots or a shop and save, that kind of thing, it's a great way for us to partner and increase access. So that's something that we'll be looking at. If we can actually do some service expansion, that would be one of those areas that's very attractive.
Thank you.
Yes.
For a guy that came from California and Seattle and into this area full of bridges and creeks and rivers, you adapted really well. I was struck by your familiarity with the area. You seem to know all about Pittsburgh and its ins and outs.
Well, thank you. I would never profess to be an expert because the community is very sensitive, and you never want to be the person to confuse Homewood with Hazelwood and make some of those gaffes. So I do try to get very careful in understanding the communities, but I will never get to the point where I can describe how to get someplace and remember the old gas station that's closed or the ice cream stop that the ice cream store that doesn't exist anymore. But I appreciate what you're saying. Yes?
14 used to go all the way downtown. It's very inconvenient to go to the north side and so forth. Can that be eliminated? Can the 14 go back downtown?
That's a great question, and having ridden the 14 today and having to take the T out to Allegheny Station just to get to the 14, I have experienced what you're talking about, and I'll do that on the way back in this morning. So that's something that we were looking at actually just before the pandemic. That was done back when the T was first extended out to Allegheny Station, and I don't want to get into all the politics of it, but I believe that there was some concern that no one was going to ride the T and everyone would continue to ride the bus, so they short-turned the 14 and forced people to ride the T. However, the ridership on the T has been very strong through that downtown corridor, so I think having the 14 go into downtown and providing a one-seat ride, which is kind of the magic point for someone riding the bus. You don't want to ride two buses or a train and a bus to get to your destination. That's something that we'll definitely be looking at.
Is the T still free for everyone from First Avenue Garage over to the North Shore? And how is it funded? And thirdly, is there any promotion this weekend with all the activity at the PPG Paints Arena and the casino advertising free rides?
So, couple things about that. Yes, the T is still free between First Avenue and Allegheny Station. That's actually funded through an agreement with the Stadium and Exhibition Authority. So the Stadium and Exhibition Authority provides a rough approximation of what the ridership would be if we charged fares. And so that, in fact, just this week we had a meeting to look at the renewal of that agreement. So that will stay in place for at least the foreseeable future. One thing I didn't mention, due to all of the service disruptions that we've had this week, due to the lack of operators to provide our normal service, we made the decision to provide free rides on transit from now through Sunday, sort of a thank you or apology type statement. So that is in place for people using the system this weekend, although I don't think that's going to continue beyond Sunday as far as I know. And I'm not sure about any other promotions that are in place. We do work with groups like Visit Pittsburgh so that we can understand when big events are coming into town and whether we need to maybe add capacity or work with them to provide transit information for visitors who are coming into town. That's something that I do on a regular basis. And we actually, on those same calls, we talk to the Cultural Trust, the Symphony, the Pittsburgh Public Theater, and just try to understand all of the events that are happening downtown. The good news is we're starting to see some increased activity downtown, and I believe the Symphony's now at about 60% of capacity when they're having events, which is fantastic. And so we'll continue to partner with them, and if there are opportunities to do some joint promotions, I think that would be great. Yes?
What is the life of an electric bus versus a gas-powered bus? I understand it's going to be very expensive to scrap them because of those batteries. And not your problem, but with more electric cars and air conditioning in the summer, and do we have enough electric power generation in the area left to do all this?
That's a very good question. We're still evaluating, and one of the reasons why we have not gone 100% into our adding electric buses completely today is trying to understand some of the end-of-life care for one of the electric buses. We're monitoring what other agencies are experiencing on those. At this point, we expect that the life of an electric bus would be the same as a diesel bus, about 12 years, 12 to 15 years is the typical life of a bus. But that end-of-life care for the battery is important. And maybe as an aside, I've been reading that with the war in Ukraine, that's also putting a tamp on the supply of the supplies needed for some of the batteries that are needed for electric vehicles. We do work with Duquesne Light to ensure that we have the capacity. They're partners with us on our battery electric buses, and so they're very interested in understanding our plans so they can make sure that they're ready to deliver the power that they need to.
I think we're out of time, so let's give Dave a hand.
Thank you.